4 minutes. That is how long the column lasted from the moment the lead BMP-2 broke cover to the moment the last engine stopped burning. 3 infantry fighting vehicles and a supply truck creeping a tree line south of Zaporizhzhia at first light, crews convinced the sector's drone coverage was down. It was not down. Somewhere behind a dirt berm, a Ukrainian operator watched cold gray hulls slide across his screen and did nothing yet. He was waiting for the lead vehicle to commit. When it did, the trap he had spent 2 days building closed in 240 seconds. That operator and how his cell turned a routine Russian advance into a graveyard of steel without firing a single artillery round is the whole of this story. But to understand why 4 minutes was enough, you have to understand the ground first. And you have to understand what the Russian crews believed about that ground when they cold started their engines in the dark. The Zaporizhzhia axis is burning again. Through the autumn and into 2026, the contested belt south of the city has been one of the grinding sectors of the entire front, a landscape of shattered shelter belts, drained irrigation canals, and fields that look empty until something moves across them. Open-source intelligence channels tracking the sector describe the same pattern week after week. Small Russian mechanized pushes, 3 or 4 vehicles at a time, probing for a soft seam in the Ukrainian line. Big armored thrusts stopped working here a long time ago. The drones made them too expensive. This particular stretch of tree line sits south of Zaporizhzhia, in the sector that runs through villages and farm tracks that have changed hands, or nearly changed hands, more times than the maps can keep up with. It is the same belt where, according to Ukrainian outlets reporting on July 14, a Russian drone struck a civilian car in a settlement in the region, and a woman did not survive. That is the register in which Russia fights this part of the war. Cheap first-person drones hunting whatever moves, including cars on a village road. This video is the mirror image of that story. Here the same class of weapon in Ukrainian hands is pointed at what it was actually designed to hunt. Armor. A column of it. Start with the machine on the Russian side because the whole miscalculation runs through it. The BMP-2 is a Soviet-era infantry fighting vehicle, tracked, amphibious on paper, armed with a 30mm autocannon and a bank of anti-tank missiles on the turret. It carries a crew of 3 and a section of dismounts in the rear. It is not a tank. Its armor is thin aluminum designed to stop rifle rounds and shell splinters, not shape-charge warheads dropped onto the roof or punched through the engine deck. Estimates for the value of a single serviceable BMP-2, refurbished and fielded, run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in a Russian inventory that has been bleeding armor for years, every one of them is harder to replace than the one before it. Now the ground truth of 2026. A tactical first-person view drone in this sector cost the Ukrainians somewhere between $400 and $2,000, depending on the airframe, the warhead, and whether it is flying on analog or digital video. It is a quadcopter, battery-powered, short-legged, deadly out to a handful of kilometers. It is flown by a human being wearing goggles who sees exactly what the drone sees, right down to the rivets on a turret, and who steers it into the target at the last instant. That is the asymmetry that defines this stretch of the Zaporizhzhia front. A $400 drone deciding whether a column of vehicles worth millions of lives long enough to matter. The Ukrainian side of this engagement is a small FPV strike cell operating under the General Staff's Unmanned Systems Directorate, the kind of unit that has become the backbone of Ukrainian defense along the southern axis. Call signs withheld, as they always are in this kind of reporting. What matters is the shape of the team, not the names. A pilot on the strike drone. A second pilot on a relay bird, an aircraft whose only job is to sit high over the battlefield and bounce the control signal so the strike drone can reach targets that would otherwise be over the horizon. A reconnaissance feed watching the approach routes, and a commander reading all of it at once, deciding when the trap is worth springing and when it is better to wait. They had been watching this tree line for 2 days. That is the part the Russian crews never accounted for. Reconnaissance in this war is patient. Long before the column ever rolled, Ukrainian Overwatch drones had mapped the sector, which tracks were passable, where the shelter belt thinned enough to expose a vehicle from above, where a ditch ran parallel to the tree line that a reversing BMP might back itself into. Geolocated footage from the sector, the kind that circulates on open-source channels after the fact, shows just how thoroughly the ground had been studied. Nothing about the Ukrainian position was improvised. The kill zone existed before the Russians decided to drive into it. Here is the first open loop, and it is the one everything turns on. The Russian column believed the sector's FPV coverage was jammed. They had reason to believe it. We will come back to exactly why they were wrong and why the belief itself was the thing that got them. Roll back to the hours before dawn. On the Russian side, a mechanized element is preparing to move. Intercepted radio chatter on Russian tactical nets, the kind Ukrainian military intelligence periodically releases, describes the texture of these operations even when the specific words are lost. Terse check-ins, engine status, a push time. 3 BMP-2s and a trailing supply truck, most likely a Kamaz, loaded with the fuel and ammunition a forward position needs to keep fighting. The plan is old-fashioned and on paper sound. Move in the dark. Use the tree line for cover. Reach the forward positions, drop the supplies, reinforce, and be dug in before the sun gives the drone something to see. And they did something clever, or at least something that used to be clever. They cold-started the engines. A diesel engine that has been running is a beacon in the infrared, a bright hot signature that a thermal camera picks up from kilometers away in the pre-dawn cool. So the crews let the vehicles sit, kept the engines off as long as they dared, and moved with cold hulls to stay dark against the thermal background. It is a real technique. It has worked before. It is exactly the kind of trick a Russian commander reaches for when he knows the sky is hostile and wants to believe he has an answer for it. The trouble is that cold starting hides you from one kind of sensor for one window of time. It does nothing about daylight. It does nothing about an optical reconnaissance drone sitting high and quiet, watching the tracks with an ordinary camera as the sky grays out. And it does nothing at all about an operator who already knows the exact tree line you are going to use, because he has watched 3 other columns use it in the past 2 days. At first light, the recon feed picks them up. 3 cold gray shapes and a boxier fourth, strung out along the shelter belt, moving slowly to keep their dust signature down. The commander of the Ukrainian Cell has been waiting for exactly this. He does not scramble. This is the discipline that separates a trained FPV unit from an enthusiast with a drone. He counts the vehicles. He fixes the spacing. He notes the truck at the rear because the truck is the prize. A BMP-2 is a vehicle. A supply truck is a vehicle plus everything a Russian forward position needs to survive the next 3 days. Take the armor and you win the morning. Take the truck and you win the week. The first FPV crossed the tree line at 60 meters and the operator held it there, throttled back, hovering in the branches, watching the lead BMP decide what it was going to do. 2 days of preparation had come down to this single choice on the Russian side. If the column stayed in the deep shadow of the shelter belt, threading a drone in would be hard. If the lead vehicle broke cover to make time, it would expose the whole column. Everything depended on whether a Russian driver 40 kilometers into a war he volunteered for would gamble on speed. That gamble came next. He broke cover. Somewhere in that Russian column was a decision, and it was the wrong one. The lead BMP-2 pulled out of the deep shade of the tree line and accelerated across an open stretch to make up time. Exactly the move the Ukrainians had mapped the ground for. The moment it cleared the branches, it was a vehicle on open ground under a sky that was not empty. The operator did not rush. He let the relay bird climb another few meters to hold the link clean, lined the strike drone up on the rear of the vehicle, and started his run. Understand what the relay bird is doing in this instant, because it is the answer to the open loop. The Russian crews believed the sector was jammed. It is entirely possible the sector was jammed, in the sense that Russian electronic warfare was radiating on the frequencies short-range FPVs normally use. Filling the air with noise meant to sever the link between operator and drone. Jamming is real and it works, and a Russian commander who checked his electronic warfare picture before pushing might have seen exactly what he wanted to see. A wall of interference over the tree line, coverage denied. What he could not see was that the Ukrainian signal was not coming from where he expected. It was coming down from a relay aircraft holding high above the battlefield, routing the control link around the jamming, threading it through a gap in the Russian picture that the crews never knew existed. The sector was not clear. It only looked clear from inside a BMP-2. That is the most dangerous kind of safe there is, the kind you have talked yourself into. The first FPV punched through the rear of the lead BMP-2 into the engine compartment and the fighting space behind it. On a vehicle this thin, a shape-charged warhead does not so much penetrate as walk straight through, and behind that armor sat the thing that ends BMPs. Stored ammunition. The autocannon rounds and the missile propellant cooked off in a chain that no crew survives. The turret lifted. Black smoke rolled up out of the hull and marked the column's position to every camera in the sky. The crew of the lead vehicle did not get out. Now the clock is running and the second BMP-2 does what a frightened crew does. It reverses. This is where 2 days of watching the ground pays for itself. The Ukrainians knew about the ditch. Reversing blind, away from a burning wreck, with a driver who cannot see much and wants only to be somewhere else. The second BMP-2 backed off the track and dropped its rear into exactly the kind of drainage cut the reconnaissance had mapped. The vehicle bogged. Tracks spinning, throwing dirt, going nowhere. A tracked vehicle stuck in a ditch is not armor anymore. It is a stationary target with a crew inside it, and the second strike drone was already in the air. The follow-up came in from the flank while the vehicle was still fighting the ditch. Another $400 of airframe and warhead against another vehicle worth 1,000 times that. The impact went into the hull side where the aluminum is thinnest, and the second BMP-2 began to burn where it sat. Canted back into the cut, its own weight holding it in the trap. That is two, the supply truck never made the tree line. Watch the sequence the way the drone footage shows it, and the truck is almost the quiet part of the story, which is exactly wrong because the truck was the point of the entire Russian operation. With 2 BMPs burning and the column's discipline gone, the Kamaz at the rear had one hope, which was to reach the cover of the shelter belt and disappear into it. It was carrying diesel and ammunition, the lifeblood of a forward position. It was also, for that reason, the most flammable thing on the battlefield. A third FPV caught it before it reached the branches. When a warhead finds a truck loaded with fuel and munitions, there is no ambiguity about the outcome. The cargo did the rest of the work. The driver did not survive. 4 minutes, 3 vehicles and a supply truck, a Russian mechanized push with 2 days of planning behind it, reduced to burning hulls before a single one of them reached its objective. The forward position they were resupplying got nothing. Half a load is not a counterattack. No load at all is a retreat that has not admitted itself yet. But the wrecks are only half the accounting, and the other half is the part Russian command hated most, because the entire engagement was filmed. Every second of that kill chain went out through the strike drone's own cameras, the relay birds' overwatch, the reconnaissance feed. Drone-eye footage of the lead BMP breaking cover, the run-in, the impact, the turret lifting on a column of smoke. The second vehicle backing itself into the ditch and dying there. The truck vanishing in a fuel fire short of the tree line. This is the footage that circulates on open-source channels within hours, geolocated, timestamped by the shape of the shelter belt and the angle of the morning light. Impossible to deny because it shows itself. Russian millblogger posts in the aftermath of engagements like this tend to follow a script. First silence, then complaints about drone saturation, then anger at commanders who ordered a daylight push into a sector everyone knew was hunted. The footage does not care about any of that. It just shows what happened. Intercepted radio chatter on the Russian nets after a loss like this has a texture too. The calm check-ins from before the push are gone. In their place come the transmissions of men trying to understand why the coverage they were promised was not there, why a sector reported as jammed turned out to be the most closely watched tree line on the axis. The answer, if it ever reached them, was the relay bird. They were beaten by an aircraft they never saw, holding altitude out of their line of sight, quietly carrying someone else's signal over the top of their jamming. Put a number on the exchange because the number is the whole argument. 3 BMP-2s and a supply truck. On the low end of published estimates, that is well over $1 million of Russian equipment, and on the realistic end, with the truck's cargo and the fielding cost of refurbished armor, considerably more. The Ukrainian cost was 3 strike drones and a relay aircraft it flew home. Call it a few $1,000s of expendable airframes against a column that had cost Russia the better part of an armored platoon. And the men. 3 vehicle crews and a truck driver removed from the Russian order of battle in a single morning, a mechanized element that ceased to exist before it fired a shot in the direction it was sent. This is the math Russian commanders on the Zaporizhzhia axis cannot make work anymore. Remember the cold start trick from the top of this story. The crews letting their engines sit dark to hide from thermal cameras. It was a real answer to a real problem. And in an earlier phase of this war, it might have carried the column through. But it solved the wrong problem. Thermal detection was never what killed this column. Patience killed it. 2 days of reconnaissance, a mapped ditch, and a relay aircraft that made a jammed sector a lie. The Russian side brought a trick designed for the last threat and drove it straight into the current one. Zoom out from the tree line and the pattern is the whole southern front. Through late 2025 and into 2026, the Zaporizhzhia axis has settled into a rhythm the drones dictate. Big armored assaults do not survive here, so Russian command breaks them into small packets, 3 or 4 vehicles at a time, hoping to slip a resupply or a reinforcement through a gap in the drone coverage before it closes. Sometimes it works. On the mornings it does not, it looks exactly like this. A short column strung along a shelter belt, a few minutes of drone footage, and a line of burning hulls where the Russian plan used to be. The Ukrainian units on this axis have industrialized that outcome. Reconnaissance, relay, strike, film, repeat. There is a strategic point underneath the spectacle, and it is the one that should worry the Russian planning staff more than any single lost platoon. The corridor south of Zaporizhzhia that used to be passable for Russian armor in the dark is not passable anymore, not without paying a price like this one. Every time a cell like this turns a column into wreckage on camera, the line of which kilometer is safe moves a little further from the Ukrainian positions and a little closer to the Russian ones. The defenders are not just destroying vehicles. They are moving the boundary of where Russia can operate at all, 1 4-minute engagement at a time. And it is being done by a weapon that costs less than the fuel in the truck it burned. That is the sentence Russian commanders keep running into on this front. A $400 quadcopter, flown by a patient operator behind a dirt berm, now decides whether a multimillion-dollar armored thrust reaches its objective or dies in the open short of the tree line. The cold start tricks, the jammers, the pre-dawn timing, all of it is an attempt to buy back the one thing the drones took away: the ability to move armor across open ground and expect it to arrive. On the Zaporizhzhia axis in the summer of 2026, that expectation is gone. The column that vanished in 240 seconds is the proof, and there will be another column and another shelter belt, and another morning exactly like this one. The crew that broke cover chose speed over cover. On ground someone else had already measured. They crossed a border that was not theirs to cross, drove into a sector that was not theirs to hold, and found out that the safest-looking tree line on the front was the one being watched the closest. The relay bird flew home. The wrecks are still there.